A bold message from the Black Lives Matter movement as that group prepares to mobilise after what they're calling, quote, the election of a white supremacist to the highest office. In a defiant statement released, the leaders of that movement confirmed their mandate has not changed, with the focus on organisation and ending what they term state-sanctioned violence. It's a movement now entering uncharted waters, little more than 2 years since its birth in Ferguson, Missouri. It was there that activists marched against police brutality following the death of Michael Brown. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Wesley Lowery was one of the first reporters on the ground. It was the beginning of a journey that would take him to Cleveland, Baltimore and beyond, covering the fractured relationship between those with and without a badge and the rise of this racial justice movement. It's all documented in his new book, They Can't Kill Us All, and I'm pleased to welcome Wesley to the programme. Wesley, thanks so much for spending some time with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Your book comes out at an interesting time, a seismic political shift. Southern Poverty Law Centre now saying 400 hate crimes committed in the week after this election. What's this period post-election told you about the state of race in America?
Of course, the state of race in America appears to be where it has always been, right? I think that one thing that we did when we elected Barack Obama is I believe a lot of us projected onto him this idea that somehow, because he had ascended to the presidency, that we had papered over, that our history as it related to race and justice, we'd finally paid our penance. It was over. We did it. We elected a black guy. We're done. What the years of the Obama presidency showed us, whether it be Trayvon Martin, or Michael Brown or Sandra Bland, the rise of the movement for Black Lives and the Black Lives Matter protest movement, what it showed us was not that a black president could somehow transcend race and usher in some post-racial reality, but rather it showed us the limitations of a black president. What we're seeing now in the days and weeks since the election of Donald Trump has been a backlash, and I think the election itself, a backlash to 8 years of a black presidency. A backlash to the idea that the country had advanced so rapidly and so quickly, that it had been diversifying and becoming this even more multinational, multi-ethnic space so quickly. We've seen voters, and not just voters, but also angry people in the streets who have been physically, and with their votes, lashing back at people. It's troubling, but it's not something that's unprecedented. You know, we have a history in the United States of this type of tension and at times this type of violence towards people who are different than us.
As you said, wasn't necessarily entirely rosy under President Obama's time in office. Donald Trump, now elected. This is a president-elect who's called the Black Lives Matter movement a threat, and as quote said, essentially calling death to police. What are the implications on Black Lives Matter when you consider that come January, President Trump will be inaugurated?
The Trump administration, while it's impossible to predict because we still have to wait and see, has sent signals that they are going to be a direct opposition to the forces of these demonstrations.
So you see a more militant approach?
Certainly. I mean, I think that, and not just towards the activists themselves in the protests, but also towards the idea of police reform, right? One thing that we forget is, and the current president, President Obama, has been criticized for not doing enough on issues of policing, and I think some of that is extremely fair criticism. But under the Obama administration, we've seen an aggressive stance by the Department of Justice, specifically the Civil Rights Division, to investigate local police departments, issue these patterns and practices reports, force local reforms, right? That's something that a new attorney general and a new administration can not only stop doing in the future, but can undo previously. So victories for some of these activists can be undone.
Let's talk about that relationship between the Black Lives Matter movement, the protest movement, and police departments across the country. It's interesting, I was at Monroe College up in the Bronx earlier this year. Their criminal justice program, you have minority students there, many born in that neighborhood of the Bronx who experience stop and frisk policing firsthand, desperate now to become a part of a police force and bring about some form of change. But what they told me almost unanimously is that they're deeply fearful of the way in which police are being represented, characterised. Are we at risk of deterring young people of colour from joining the police force and making change within as a result of this narrative that, in a sense, has been created?
You know, I think that there's certainly concerns from a lot of police officers. I hear it from officers in my voicemails and my email, and the ones who I talk to hear it from chiefs. A concern that the conversation we're having nationally places police as the opposition and degrades our image of what American policing is. But when we talk about the relationship between black communities and the police, that's not something that began deteriorating or was deteriorated because of black people being upset with the police, right? The thing that is most likely to prevent young black and brown men and women from distrusting the police is the police killing fewer people, the police solving more homicides, right? Like there's a, at the end of the day, we often talk about, we set up a false binary. Like we set up this world where we need to restore our relationships between communities and police. But that assumes, it bakes in the premise that there was ever a good relationship. And what we know, based on what we know about American history, is that there has never been a time in American history where black communities and police had positive relationships. In fact, the further back you go, the worse and the more violent and vitriolic those relationships are. And so I think we have to be honest about what we should be striving towards. We're striving towards a new future, a new relationship that has never existed, not a return to one that is gone.
What's the biggest misconception society, the media as a whole, has of the Black Lives Matter movement?
As I do these stories, I get emails and phone calls constantly, often from white readers who say, I just don't get it. I don't understand. What are they all in the streets about? What are they so worked up about? They don't get it. My theory is that if you can understand one of the demonstrators, one protester, one person, who they are three-dimensionally, why they're there, what their motivations are, what their history is, their previous interactions with the police, if you can understand one of them, then perhaps you can begin understanding 10 of them, or 100 of them, or 1,000 of them in a movement. I think that there's this misperception that these young men and women hate the police, right? That there's this, and that's not the case. You know, at least not in my experience and the people I've talked to and I've interviewed. But rather, it's a demand, it's an assertion of their humanity that no, our lives matter. That we can't just be killed and have no questions answered. And I think that should be something that people with sober minds should all be able to agree on.
Often families who have lost a loved one will email you and say, can you come here? Can you report on this, the lack of justice we've seen? You've flown from city to city to cover these stories. You were once told by an editor you wrote in your book, the more emotional the story, the less emotional the reporter. Another thing you say in your book, when you were called to respond to the story of Philando Castile, who was shot dead in Minnesota, you say, I sprang up from my desk and ran to the bathroom to throw up. Then I began to report. How easy is it to detach from the emotional reality of these stories?
For me, I think for all of us, actually, when we see one of these videos, whether it be Walter Scott or Philando Castile, Alton Sterling, there's an immediate emotional reaction because we're humans. We've watched someone be killed on tape, right? It should never stop being traumatic, no matter who we are, no matter our politics, black or white. That should always be something that gives us pause. For me, my job as a journalist, when I see one of these videos, is to get answers to these questions. When you have that feeling amidst this trauma of I need to do something, for me, the thing I do is I pick up my phone and start making calls. I start sending the emails. I start figuring out who is this person? What are the circumstances? What are the policies? How might this person not have been killed? You know, I've told myself this from the beginning when I took this beat and took this job. I don't ever want to watch a video and not be sick to my stomach. I don't ever want to be nonchalant about human death. And the moment that I become desensitized to this, that it no longer pains me and hurts me to tell these stories, I need to get a new job, right? And I think that there's been this spate of these shootings and these deaths, the hashtag after hashtag. And I think sometimes it's easy to just kind of drown them out. And I think we make a mistake when we do that. I think we have to remember that each of these people is a life, and that they have a family, they have friends, and that because of that, they deserve transparency and justice and answers about what happens in these shootings.
It's an important book at an interesting time. It's titled They Can't Kill Us All. Wesley Lowery, Washington Post reporter. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.